Two people leave the same party. Same night, same amount of alcohol, same terrible decision to drive home. Driver A makes it home. Hangover, life continues. Driver B hits someone crossing the road. Criminal record, vehicular manslaughter. The only difference? Whether someone happened to be there at that exact moment. In other words, luck. So why does one driver deserve a ruined life while the other gets a hangover? Most people think the answer is obvious. Driver B caused an actual death. But before you decide how much driver B deserves to be punished, let me tell you a story. In 1966, a man named Charles Whitman climbed to the top of a tower at the University of Texas and opened fire on the crowd below. He killed 16 people. He had left a note beforehand asking that after his death, doctors examine his brain. He wrote that he didn't understand what was happening to him, that he was having violent thoughts he couldn't explain and couldn't stop. The autopsy found a tumor pressing directly on his amygdala, the part of the brain most associated with emotional regulation and impulse control. The tumor didn't appear from nowhere. It was caused by prior biological events. The impulses it produced caused thoughts. The thoughts caused a decision. The decision caused 16 deaths. So tell me, at what point in that chain does Charles Whitman begin? Now, driver B didn't have a tumor, but they did have a brain shaped by years of experiences they didn't choose. Neural pathways laid down before they could drive, before they could drink, before they were old enough to be held responsible for anything. Which raises an uncomfortable question. In what sense did driver B ever truly decide anything at all? And this idea becomes even stranger when you stop looking at individuals and start looking at history. In 1789, ordinary people got so angry about luck deciding people's lives that they invented the guillotine. Partly because ordinary people were furious that aristocrats lived lavishly through pure accident of birth while everyone else starved through pure accident of birth. The entire revolution was, in a sense, a very violent argument about luck and fairness. But the French Revolution is actually the easy version of this problem, because at least you can see the injustice clearly. The harder version looks like this. A perfectly ordinary German person, born in 1900, might, depending entirely on circumstance, end up a collaborator with a genocidal regime, a resistance fighter, or someone who quietly kept their head down and survived. None of those paths were chosen from some neutral starting point. The circumstances were handed to them, which is exactly what philosopher Hannah Arendt was thinking about when she covered the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in 1961. She coined the phrase, the banality of evil, the idea that ordinary people in ordinary circumstances could participate in atrocities, not through monster-like malice, but through quiet, bureaucratic compliance. Which raises a question most of us prefer not to sit with. What would you have done? Think about where you were born, what family you landed in, what school you went to, what country, what century. You didn't apply for any of it. You just arrived, and the circumstances started doing their work. The person you are right now, your values, your opportunities, your sense of what's normal and what's acceptable, is partly a product of conditions you never chose. But fine, let's say driver B still made a choice. The question is, what kind of person makes that choice? Someone impulsive, reckless, someone willing to gamble with other people's lives. But here's the thing about those traits. In 1979, psychologist Thomas Bouchard reunited a pair of identical twins named James Springer and James Lewis, who had been separated at birth and raised by different families. They had both named their firstborn sons James Allen. Both had owned a dog named Toy. Both had worked in law enforcement. Both drove the same model of Chevrolet. Both had the same smoking habits, the same nail-biting habits. They had never met. The study that followed, the Minnesota Twin Study, found that many traits, including aggression, empathy, and risk tolerance, are heavily influenced by genetics, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Your character may be partly inherited. They emerged from genetics, childhood, and a brain you never consciously built. You know whether patience comes easily to you or costs you something. You know whether you've ever looked at someone else's self-control and thought, how do they do that? Because for you, it has never been that simple. The world doesn't particularly care about that distinction. It just watches what you do and draws its conclusions. So if discipline came easily to you, how much of that was really your achievement? And if someone else was born with heavier impulses, how much hatred do they actually deserve for failing against them? But the disturbing part isn't that life is unfair. It's that our entire moral and legal system pretends luck doesn't matter, while constantly punishing people for it. Courts distinguish between murder murder and attempted murder, between fraud that succeeds and fraud stopped at the last second. Same intention, same willingness to harm, yet the punishment changes dramatically depending on outcomes no one fully controlled. And it goes deeper than courts. You call yourself moral, but how much of that morality has ever really been tested? Maybe you've never stolen because you've never been desperate enough, never become cruel because life never squeezed you hard enough. Give you someone else's genetics, someone else's childhood, someone else's pain. Are you certain you would still be you? Or are you just lucky you never had to find out? Because despite all this, society still has to make decisions. Dangerous people still exist. Harm still exists. But once you see how much of a person was shaped before they ever made a conscious choice, it becomes harder to feel pure hatred or pure pride.